Dr. Bug comes over and he's screaming as loud as he can. And Dr. Bug looks over at him and says, "Stop screaming. You know we're not going to hurt you. We've told you we're not going to hurt you. Quit screwing around and stop your screaming. Just let us get this done." And he reaches over with a digit, whatever it was. I don't know if it was a claw or what. Boop, taps him on the head. And Terry says he was out like a light when I went through the regression and realized that the bug dream and the mountain bike dream were not two separate events. And the red plaid shirt was a uniform.
There was a craft being held at Wright-Patterson, and that craft was taken over by the Anderson Trust. And so there's guys like John Anderson, John Lovett, kind of early CIA guys. And then Carl Compton comes to the scene, president of MIT, and all of a sudden he's, in charge or has to do with this somehow. Those experiences existed in some liminal state, or were you actively repressing them as if they hadn't happened and then they sort of resurfaced in 95? Or
I don't know.
Okay.
What I do know is I bought a lot of UFO books.
Interesting. So you, on some level, you bought
it. I didn't internalize it. I didn't relate it to myself.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't even consciously discuss that mountain bike incident.
Did your dad have any experiences?
Because
it's funny, I just interviewed Jacob Barber, and he said, probably as a result of his work with crash retrievals and UFOs, he has this sort of winged sphere thing show up at his house.
We have stuff show up over our house. We have a UAP we call the Angel that shows up, and it looks like it has oar wings. It's blue, and it comes in, materializes, hangs out over the house. It's seen by neighbors. It's seen by everybody. And then it's gone. It shoots into outer space.
I talked to Jake's son about this when we were at his house, and there's a lot of commonality. But I don't want to speak for him at all. But I do recall having a lot of similarities with my childhood with his, which is really interesting. But back to my dad, all I know is he had a lot of UFO books, and I got the impression that he didn't want to discuss it with me until I was old enough. And then by that time, I had my own career, blah, blah, blah. And so...
Did he ever discuss it with you?
Oh, yeah.
What did he say?
Yeah. He would always maintain this strict, rigid rubric of scientific parsimony, right? And so he would, in an open-minded way, entertain possibilities, but then he would have these discussions about, like we were talking about, probabilities, right? What's this, and so forth. And so I think it was his way of dealing with the fear by trying to rationalize everything and just always conclude, not sure, don't know, right? But leave it as a possibility. I'll, worship the Carl Sagan, perspective of the world that, what's the cliche now is that, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof.
Yeah.
So 2018, I got the extraordinary proof.
I don't think a New York Times article is extraordinary proof. I
haven't gotten to that yet.
I think your experiences.
I haven't gotten to it yet.
Okay.
The New York Times article is 2017.
Right.
In 2018, I attended a conference where a guy got up to the podium and he announced himself as a former Air Force sergeant at Whiteman Air Force Base who was a PRP qualified medic. PRP is the Personnel Reliability Program. It's the HR effort program to make sure you don't have crazy people controlling nukes, right? And here's this guy, and he starts telling the story about this camping trip that he and his other buddy, another sergeant or airman first class or whatever, took this camping trip, and how he was injured as a result of this experience where the bottom of his feet were burned, sunburned. And so I don't want to tell Terry's story.
It was Terry Lovelace.
Terry Lovelace, yeah. And he and I have become very good friends since then. But what really got my attention was when he told the story about being on a table and Dr. Bug comes over and he's screaming as loud as he can. And Dr. Bug looks over at him and says, "Stop screaming. You know we're not going to hurt you. We've told you we're not going to hurt you. Quit screwing around and stop your screaming. Just let us get this done." And he reaches over with a digit, whatever it was. I don't know if it was a claw or what. Boop, taps him on the head. And Terry says he was out like a light. And all of a sudden, I had already moved up from the back row, right? Somebody had left, and I took their seat, and I was on the front left, and I'm looking right at them. I'm maybe from here to the wall away. And I'm starting to get the goosebumps, right? And the shivers running up and down my spine. And then when he tells the Dr. Bug part of the story, I'm freaking out. I'm really tense. I'm sweating, and I get the hair standing up on my arms. And so that's when all the mountain bike stuff came flooding back.
Mm.
And it was shortly after that, I would say within a few months after that, when I went through the regression and realized that the bug dream and the mountain bike dream were not two separate events.
Mm.
And the red plaid shirt was a uniform.
Do you think there's some sort of MIT connection with this topic? There's a MIT president named Carl Compton, and there's a guy named Robert Sarbacher, who's this sort of famous, microwave frequency physicist who clearly had something to do with the UFO question. He's on record talking to UFO researcher William Steinman, but also speaking to Wilbert Smith, this Canadian physicist who had a UFO research program called Project Magnet. And Robert Sarbacher's name just keeps popping up. It pops up with Thomas Townsend Brown and anti-gravity experiments in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And Sarbacher says that there was a craft being held at Wright-Patterson, and that craft was taken over by the Anderson Trust. And so there's guys like John Anderson, John Lovett, kind of early CIA guys. And then Carl Compton comes to the scene, president of MIT, and all of a sudden he's, in charge or has to do with this somehow. And so I do wonder if MIT has some sort of connection with this whole thing. And if this sort of runs in families, as it's rumored. Whitley Strieber obviously wrote Communions, maybe the archetypal alien abduction case, if not, Betty and Barney Hill. But he, talks about his uncle working very closely with General Axon at Wright Airfield. And his father was a reservist, an Air Force guy. And, so I don't know. Do you think there's something there with you, or?
I don't know is my succinct answer. But since we're in speculation space here, I have nothing in my experience that is inconsistent with that.
Mm.
There is no flags in any of all the literature that I've read about all that that is inconsistent. So it's sort of like with Jake and his team, I don't see any inconsistencies there. There's as I was mentioned to you yesterday, there's a lot of smoke, but no flame that I personally observed at DARPA or the AFRL experience when I was assigned at Wright-Patterson for 3 years.
Yeah, you worked over. We got to talk about that.
Yeah.
Because your career is so fascinating, because I know you've never seen a UFO firsthand or been read into anything, but you were stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and you were vice president at SAIC, which always comes up with the UFO stuff.
For only 6 months.
Only 6 months. Yeah, fair enough. But I find that interesting. It's almost like you were hovering in and around the topic. You're always around the perimeter of this stuff, but like,
Yeah.
you never get let in.
Yeah. I was a bridesmaid, never a bride, right? That was kind of the way it has evolved. And
would you hear rumors at Right Pat? Like,
Oh, yeah.
people, because like, yeah, any anecdotes that might give you some conviction that something is going on there outside of the stuff in the lore, like, you have Barry Goldwater, saying that he asked Curtis LeMay for, what was being held in the Blue Room at Wright-Patterson.
I called Curtis LeMay and I said, General, I know we have a room at Wright-Patterson where you put all this secret stuff. Can I go in there? I've never heard him get mad, but he got madder than hell at me, cussed me out, said, don't ever ask me that question again.